Today, before I could start working on this brake line on this Chevy Blazer, I had to shovel some snow. This brake line popped just the day before it started snowing. We had about 8 inches of snow, and that was 2 days ago. The weather's been in the 20s and the 30s during the day. I was hoping some of this would melt, but that not being the case, I have to get started. Well, this may not be as bad as I thought it was going to be. It looks like this brake line broke, the one that's coming into the rubber hose. Why this snapped over here, I don't know. This is pretty rigid line. But this is the brake line that goes from the rubber hose. It gets attached to the rubber hose, goes across to the rear end. And let me see if I can get this under here. It gets attached to the T. So I'm going to look around to see if there's any other brake. I'm going to put some fluid in there, start it up, and have someone step on the brakes for me, see if it's squirting out anyplace else. But it looks like this might be it.
If you have an older vehicle or one that's covered in rust like this, don't even attempt this job without having a line wrench. It's open on one end so you can go over the line, and it contacts the nut in more area than a regular open end wrench would. Now this nut happens to be coming out pretty easy. Had a little penetrating fluid on it. Usually it's not that easy. And if you round off that nut, that's another can of worms that you have to deal with. Now if you look close, you can see that the nut's turning, but the line's starting to turn with it. That's just rust. This line's going to snap. It snapped. We're changing this way, but you can see how it snapped. See this rust that's built up around the nut, keeping the nut from sliding the way it's supposed to. But we'll get this out. I'm going to show you what this nut looks like. Let me get this into focus. You can see on the bottom, there isn't any rust on the threads. The problem with the rust is not here on the bottom, but on the top of this nut, where the tubing comes into it, right here. That rust keeps the nut from spinning, and it cracks the tubing. Let's go to the other side and remove the other nut. Now, this nut is frozen into the fitting. It won't spin. I can't get this out. I'm going to get out from under the vehicle and work it from the other side. With some extra penetrating fluid and let it sit a while, I was able to get that nut out. Now, I took this brake line off to take it to match it up when I bought new brake line. See that spring that's on there? That's the original. I believe it's called the anti-pebble, anti-gravel. It's to protect the brake line against rocks hitting up against it. Anyway, the new one doesn't have that. I'm going to bend this to shape. I'm going to use this old line to match up, and this is the old nut that was in there. I did bring these to the auto parts store to match them up to make sure the flaring was the same. So the flaring's the same. They checked the nuts on it to make sure the threads were the same, and I should be good to go. I'm going to get under there, bend it up, get it in place, and I'll show it to you when it's done. Oh, and one other thing. I have this brake line taped on one side, so as I'm snaking it through under there, I'm not going to pick up any dirt or rust into it. Okay, and I have the small brake line for the other side. Well, after struggling under the vehicle, I come to find out that the nuts on the tubing aren't the right size. If these aren't lined up perfectly, you can't screw them in. So to make sure, I cut it off the tube so I could line it up perfectly to see if it would fit. It does not fit. Anyway, I cut the tubing. I just used the tubing cutter to cut the end of it off. I'm going to use the old nuts that came off. Make sure you have them on before you flare it. One side, this is the factory flare. Now I have to go and flare the other side. And when you're flaring this, after you cut it, you have to ream it out in there. You want to match the flares, and you need the flare kit for this. If you don't have one of AutoZone or one of them will lend it to you. Let me show you what I used to do the flaring. Now, when you get the tube in there, to get the right height adjustment, the kit comes with these little fittings. Just go to the shoulder of the fitting. That's how much the tube should stick out. That's right, just like that. And you take this fitting, just stick it into the tube. Let me get that other piece. It's going to start raining here. It's going to start raining here soon. When you put this on, you want to get it straight. Now, if you could do this inside on a vise, it's a lot easier. And if you never did this before, get a piece of the old tubing that you have, make a couple of flares just to get the hang of it. If you mess up on that, it's not going to hurt anything. Snug it down. Before you put any pressure on it, make sure you're perfectly straight. You don't want this tilted one side to the other. Make sure you're tight, so both ends, so it doesn't slip out. You don't need any tool for leverage on this. Just turn it by hand until it stops. Once it stops, just back it off. Let me get this in. This is what it should look like. Now use the same tool, same setup without the fitting. Get it snug. Make sure you're straight again. And get that handle back in. Okay. And the same thing. Just turn it by hand until it stops. Get it snug because you want to make sure you get the flare, but don't make it so tight where you split it. I'll just back it out. And this is what it should look like. When the nut slides up to it, it'll fit right in there. When you tighten this, make sure you tighten the front butterfly nut first. Tighten this one first, where the opening is, then the back one. And get it good and snug.
Well, I'm catching a break today. It's been raining, pouring for the last 3 days. The snow is almost gone, and caught a break in the weather. It's about 40 degrees outside. Last few days I was working outside before the rain, it was in the 20s. So I'm trying to get this done today. I parked this truck over a week ago, had it sit a couple days, went to use it. The brake line was down, and I did manage to get the brake line in between the rainstorms. Now what I have If you recall, the brake line was leaking over here. I have to bleed this brake line, and I found out that this is frozen. So I'm going to try what I've done successfully before, was to heat it up with a propane torch. If you have a hotter torch, it would be even better. I'm going to put some wax on it, see if that penetrates down. I'll heat it and cool it a few times, see if that works. If it doesn't work and it ends up rounding out on me, I'll use a pair of vice grips on it. But before I use the vice grips, I'm going to stick a drill bit in here, not to crush it. That also works. I'm not going to video pumping the brakes because I have to do this as quick as possible in between the downpours. This is one of the first breaks I have where it wasn't raining on me, and I want to get this done without working in the pouring rain. I'll show updates as I go along. Alright, the good news is it worked. Now what I did just to go through the steps, I heated that bleed out valve with a torch. Once it got good and hot, I just put a piece of wax on it and I let it drip in there. Pulled the wax away. I did that several times. I used a socket, 10 millimeter socket. It's starting to rain out here again. It's not pouring. I put the 10 millimeter socket on it. Then I tapped it. I tapped it a couple of times with the hammer. This is all to break up the rust. I pulled it off. I heated it with the torch again. I sprayed this penetrating fluid on it. You can spray anything on it. This is just to cool it off. If you don't have, if you don't have anything to spray it with, you could just put a wet rag on it and cool it down. I heated it again. I put the wax on it again.
And then I was able to bleed this brake. After getting it all together, took it for a test drive, and everything worked out fine. Now it's time to go inside, wash up, sit by the fire, and enjoy the rest of the evening. If you found this video useful, give it a like. And if you have any comments or questions, post them down below. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe. And not to miss any of my new video uploads, hit that notification bell. And until next time, stay safe.